Hello, everybody. This is International Master Sam Shankland, and today I would like to look at a game I recently played at the U.S. Chess Championship in St. Louis, which, by the way, was a remarkably well-organized event. And this game I played against Grandmaster Alexander Onishuk, who is one of the very best players in the United States, with a FIDE rating just shy of 2,700. So here we go. I'm playing the white pieces against Grandmaster Onishuk. So the opening, I chose to play the Scotch opening on the white side. I didn't really want to play the Roy Lopez just yet. While this is the most common move and probably objectively speaking the best chance for white to fight for an advantage, I haven't had much experience in this. And while I'm trying to get better and learn it, I thought playing against really one of the best guys in the country was not a good way to test out how I'm doing in the Roy Lopez. I should be playing what I know best, which in this case was the Scotch defense, or the Scotch attack, Scotch variation, whatever you want to call it. So for a very long time in this position, bishop c5 was the main line, but recently the move he played, knight f6, has been coming up more and more often. So there's two ways for white to play here. One is knight c3, and black will play bishop b4. And it's kind of awkward for white to defend this pawn, but he'll be okay after knight c6, bc6, bishop d3, d5, takes, castles. Black has a nice center, but it's likely to be attacked sometime when white plays c4. He'll likely end up with an isolated pawn somewhere or other, and it's about approximately equal. But this wasn't really the kind of position I was going for. So I played knight takes c6, which is the most aggressive move. B takes c6, e5. So here, black makes an odd-looking move that Grandmaster Alexander Kotov once characterized as an exchange of inconveniences. He plays queen e7, pinning this pawn to the white king. So white's reply is basically forced. He has to play queen e2. Now, both sides have now made moves that they did not really want to make, queen e7 and queen e2. But black is banking on queen e7 being a better move to play than queen e2, because it can go to e6 or h4 in some cases, or many other squares, while the white queen is going to be more misplaced. So here black really does have to move his knight. So knight d5, and white kicks it again with c4. So here, again, a long time ago, bishop a6 was considered to be one of the only moves, and white will play b3. And now there's a ton of variations here. Anand has played g5 before, which is very interesting. G6 has been played. The key kinds of positions are sort of like this. Usually something like g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, castles. Or sorry, instead of bishop g2, bishop b2 to protect this pawn. Castles, bishop g2, some rook to e8. Castles, and then bishop e5, takes, cd5, bishop f1, king f1, and cd5. There are a lot of endings like this. Black could be anywhere. Black's pawn could be on g6 or g5. Black's king could be on the king side or on the queen side. There's lots of ways to get to this kind of endgame. I think it's approximately equal chances, although black is technically ahead material because he has two pawns and a rook for a bishop and knight. White will be able to coordinate his pieces very well. For example, knight c3, c6, and maybe knight a4, looking at the c5 square. And he's going to play rook d1 and prevent black from advancing the d pawn or the c pawn. So they have to keep protecting each other. So that's approximately equal, I think. But there's also plenty of other moves that are more aggressive. At the World Youth Chess Championship 2 years ago, not the year I won it, but the year before, one of my opponents, international master from Ukraine, played queen h4 against me here. And this is an absolutely wild variation. Black is immediately threatening queen d4. So g3 is the natural response, trying to kick the queen and give this bishop some room. But it actually loses instantly to queen d4, bishop b2, and bishop b4 check. So in that game, I played a3, which is the correct move, bishop c5, g3, bishop takes f2. It's just a wild position. And here, white ended up down in exchange, but I had excellent compensation in the form of an attack, extra development, and black having a ridiculously bad bishop on a6. The game actually ended in a draw, though I had some chances. So that's kind of the general scoop on the opening of bishop a6, but Onishuk actually played knight b6, which is becoming more popular these days. So I played knight c3, bishop a6, putting pressure on this pawn. Queen e4. This is an excellent square for the queen, and it lets this bishop come out to, let's say, d3 sometime soon, which would be very nice for white, and he'll have a pleasant position. However, black is not ready to just let white off the hook right away. He plays queen e6, threatening this pawn. So white has to play b3. So here, Onishuk surprised me with a somewhat offbeat, but definitely playable move, castles queenside. The most quote-unquote normal move in this position is bishop b4, after which white will play bishop d2, bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, d5, and now notice white can't really take this pawn because if cd, cd hits the queen, black will trade off this bad bishop for white's good one, and white will lose the right to castle, and will be under some serious pressure. And white obviously can't take with the e-pawn because it hangs the queen. So queen h4 and d takes c4. Black's currently up a pawn, but they are tripled isolated pawns, and this one here on c4 cannot move at all because it's pinned to the bishop on a6. And white will quickly be able to gain it back with moves like rook c1, although I think he should probably finish his development with bishop e2 and castles queenside first. And it's likely that the position will be approximately equal at the end. For example, castle, knight d5, takes c4, takes c4, takes c4, and a move like rook e8. And maybe white has a slight pull here, but I don't think he has too much. I should also point out that f4 doesn't help matters because of f6, and if e takes f6, queen e3 check. So that's the general gist of the positions there. They're very complicated. There's a lot of subtleties that I may have missed in the preliminary run-through I just gave. But Onishuk was in the mood for something a little more drastic. So after b3, he castles queenside. And here I sat down at the board for a long think. There are a lot of moves to calculate. Most notably, c5 is a very aggressive move. Looking to play c takes b6, and meanwhile, black's pieces are totally unpreced. For example, black cannot just play bishop takes c5 because I opened up a discovered attack on the bishop on a6. So bishop takes a6 check, and white's just up a piece. So after c5, black has two pieces unpreced. The only thing he can do is bishop takes f1, and now I play c takes b6, and I'm attacking his bishop, and I've got this annoying pawn here that's ready to take a7 and wreak havoc on black's position. However, I was actually worried in this position about black playing bishop takes g2. And after queen takes g2, queen takes e5 check, king d2, bishop b4, I thought black would have a huge initiative and white would really be in bad shape after something like bishop b2, d5. I thought that it was very unlikely that I would survive this position too long. It turns out that this is actually somewhat playable, but I didn't really like my chances. So after a long think, I played bishop d2. Now this is not the best move. It's not the most natural square for the bishop. That is bishop b2. And I think that in this case, maybe white has a slight advantage, but it's very interesting. I know the radical grandmaster Alexander Morozevich of Russia has played this position a couple times with white with some success. And I think that this variation maybe will give white a slight advantage. However, I still had in mind moves like c5 and just trying to push this through, but I thought that his idea with bishop f1 takes g2, I would rather have my bishop on d2 to defend, so that's what I played, but it just doesn't work out. So here my opponent played rook to e8, but it turns out I think maybe bishop b7 is even stronger. black will just quickly play c5, and it's hard to see what white's going to do. For example, castle queenside, rook e8. C5 for white is never going to be effective at all now because there's no hanging bishop on a6. And white's just coming under enormous pressure. It's hard to see how he's going to defend all his pieces. And I think black can be comfortable with maybe a slight advantage here. So that's what we looked at after the game. But Onishuk played a little more to the point, just played rook e8. So here it's hard for white to play any move basically at all because e5 is under attack. And if f4, f6, and if bishop f4, bishop b4, it's just looking ugly. So the only real thing I could do here is c5, which I had planned, and we get a very interesting position. So bishop takes f1 is forced, c takes b6. Now bishop takes g2 seems like it's not going to work because after queen takes e5, white can play king d1, and the position seems relatively safe compared to when he had to play king d2 allowing bishop b4. White will play king c2, rook a e1, and castle by hand. I think his position will be okay. So Onishuk correctly dropped his bishop back to a6. And now white, of course, has to play b takes a7. So I'm threatening to make a new queen. And now there's a few things black can do, but I think the only real move is king b7. Because bishop b7, I castle queenside, and he can't really play c5 because I make a queen and I win. So king b7 is the only real move here. And now I castle queenside. So here we reach a very interesting unbalanced position. White is temporarily up a pawn, but it's looking it's very unlikely that this pawn is going to survive. Either on a7 or e5, something's going to go. Black's king is under some pressure. White has, I guess you could call a slight lead in development. And it's just a very tense double-edged position. And here, after a long think, Onishuk came up with a very nice move, bishop to c5. So I should point out, after king takes a7, bishop e3 check, for example, I think white has a very reasonable position here. He's going to be invading on the dark squares. He's got a huge initiative, and black is going to have trouble taking this pawn on e5 because then the pawn on d7 is going to fall, destroying his structure. So, and also king takes a7 is just a bit slow. It's not in the spirit of the position, and because the pawn on a7 isn't making any threats, except it does prevent a couple moves. Like here, for example, some of you might say queen takes e5, try to trade into an endgame and take off a key central pawn. Well, here white has the unexpected move a8 queen, which looks like it's just hanging to two pieces. It doesn't do anything. But it actually just wins the game because black can't play rook takes a8 because of queen takes e5. And if king takes a8, white plays queen a4 and pins this bishop, and black, when he tries to defend it, will get skewered along the e-file. So, and there's no way for black to defend against both these threats after queen a4. So queen takes e5 is not possible here. I know I was, I guess, kind of hoping he would fall for it, I guess, which is kind of a childish hope because he's such a strong player and obviously saw this. Another thing to point out is bishop a3 check is no better, trying to play queen takes e5 because, again, queen, and now, while the rook is protected against the skewer, I do take this off this a3 bishop too. So there's no real way for black to take this pawn immediately. So he found a nice move, bishop to c5, which is very strong. It's preventing bishop e3, or trying to, which is what I really wanted to play, which opens the d-file to this pawn, and would also put this bishop on an excellent diagonal and protect my pawn on a7, which has the potential to wreak havoc and be seriously annoying. And he also now has the real threat of playing queen takes e5. For example, if I play a silly move like h3, he can take this pawn because now after a8 queen, king takes queen a4, king b7, rook e1 doesn't do anything because black's rook is protected. So immediately there are threats on my position. So I considered a few moves here. I considered f4, rook e1, and bishop e3 mainly. So f4 I thought changed very little because he plays f6. And if I try to defend this guy, it just doesn't work out too well because he plays bishop f2. And I'm left looking a little bit silly. That rook has to move away. I don't think any exchange sack here is going to be too effective. If he plays bishop e2 first, bishop f2 first, maybe there's some way to play like bishop e3 and try to play queen b4, knight e4, knight c5. There's going to be some initiative, but I really don't think it'll be quite enough. So I ended up playing bishop e3 here. So this would just give me an advantage if not for the move he played, which of course I saw, but I didn't have much of a choice, d5. So I would like to take this, but it doesn't quite work out. After queen takes e4, knight takes e4, rook takes, bishop takes e3 check, fe, rook takes e4. I have two dangerous pawns, but there's really no way to push them through, like d7, rook d8, he's holding together, and d takes c7, maybe even just king takes a7, rook d8, rook e8 is okay. Something like rook d1 and king b7. No, not king b7, then he gets to queen. So I guess king b6. But maybe here white can play rook takes d8, rook takes d8, rook d8. This actually seems okay, so he probably shouldn't take any risks at all and just, after this, play king takes c7. But I think this position is just going to be miserable for white and just totally lost. So that pawn is immune. It's not going to help me to try to go crazy with sacrifices, looking for discoveries, because he takes this bishop off with check, and he plays queen c6, covering this diagonal, and black's doing fine. So I have to move my queen somewhere. But where am I going to go? This is a very tough question. So what I wanted to do was play queen a4. But here he can play queen takes e5, and I really was having trouble finding a good move. But it's hard to find any other square. I have to decide what kind of position I want to play here. One thing I did misjudge is after move like queen f3, bishop takes c3, queen takes c3. I misjudged this position. I thought that an endgame like this one, black would be quite a bit better, but it turns out that's just not true at all. White will be able to blockade this c5 square, and I don't think that black can have any advantage at all. Maybe white should try to contest the e-file first. But once white puts a knight on c5, black's extra pawn is on c7. It's not doing anything productive. Black's bishop won't be so amazing, and white will have a passed a-pawn. I mean, the computer initially says that black is doing well, but I think that on the whole, white should be okay in that ending, about equal. However, I misjudged that. Quite naturally, I thought black was going to be better there. So what I wanted to do was get a position where I could play f takes e3. So something like this. If he plays bishop e3, I play f takes e3, queen takes e5, and I'll play something like queen b4 check, and rook h e1. And I thought I would have excellent compensation for a pawn here, because I'll quickly play e4. I'll start opening lines. I can play something like queen c5 check and rook d4, trying to go to b4. There's going to be pressure on black's position. I don't know. It's not necessarily winning, but I think that black will really have to be on his toes, and maybe there's about equal chances here. So the problem, though, is after queen a4, queen takes e5, it's hard for me to find a move, because if bishop d4, he can even take it. And if rook takes d4, c5 just wins, because once this rook moves, this knight falls. And if queen takes d4, then queen takes, rook takes, and we get this endgame again, but this time white's pieces are a little awkward because he can't contest the e-file. So I played a move I was actually pretty proud of in the game. I played queen to f4. So, right now, queen takes e5 obviously is impossible on account of queen e5, and I win a piece. And if bishop takes e3, then I'm happy to play f takes, queen c5, queen e5, and then queen b4 check, and rook h e1, like we just looked at. However, black has the nice move g5, and it's again a question to white, where will he put his queen? So if queen takes g5, black plays rook g8, and queen f4, rook g4, queen f3, black wins a piece with d4. So, among other things, I'm sure queen takes c5 here is strong. There's lots of ways that this just doesn't work out. I should also point out, one move I really wanted to play after d5 was knight a4, being tricky. If takes the queen and then takes the bishop check will pick up the queen again, and white will have a good position, but black unfortunately has the little in-between move bishop a3. So in any case, bishop e3, d5, f4, queen f4, g5. But now I play queen a4, because this is a very different position here after queen takes e5 than with the pawn on g7, because this diagonal being weak is very important. For example, here, I should have played bishop d4, and if bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, king takes a7, like we were looking at earlier with the pawn on g7, now it's a very different position, because after h4, white really poses a question to black, how is he going to deal with this pawn on g5? If he plays a move like h6, well, now white will play knight a4, and black can't really invade on the second like he wanted to, because h takes g5 will always be in the air. I mean, maybe white will play rook d2 anyway to begin with, but it's very hard for black to untangle his pieces there, which, and in the case with the pawn on g7, he would have no issues at all. The move my opponent was planning to play was queen f4 check, which is a very nice move, I think, because it's very hard for white to find the right thing to do. Turns out the best move, while looking a bit strange, is rook d2, and I think black has no choice but to go for the endgame now. But if white plays king b2, which is the most natural move, black has the very nice reply, bishop b6, and white can't really find a good way to trade pieces. If bishop takes b6, c takes b6, for example, black has really improved his pawn structure. And if bishop h8, queen takes f2 check, king anywhere really, rook takes h8, black has an excellent initiative in this position. He's going to take another pawn, he's going to have two pawns for the exchange, and he's got two very active bishops, and white's king is looking like it's going to be in very serious peril very soon. That's why rook f2 is the best move in this position. Or rook d2, I apologize. So, however, in the game, I guess I was still thinking that ending would be much worse for me, so I played a very aggressive. I played rook d4, just trying to lift the rook into the attack on b4. However, I was also getting very low on time, but this is kind of a feeble attempt. It's not going to help matters much at all. He played a very cool move, bishop takes a7, and it's very hard to see how white plans to continue the attack. The natural thing to do is rook b4 check, bishop b6, bishop d4, but after queen f4 check, I don't really see what black is hoping to have happen here. For example, bishop e3, queen d6, and if white tries to play queen b5, trying to sacrifice material on b6 to rook 3, black can just play a countersec, rook takes e3, f takes e3, and let's say bishop b5, breaking the pin on this bishop to attack the queen. White will play something like queen a3, and after rook a8, white's going to have to relinquish the defense of this rook, and black is going to have a raging attack still, even after something like knight a4, bishop e3 check, and bishop c5. It just looks like it's going to... Well, okay, actually, bishop c5 runs into rook takes b5, but in general, I think this position is just going to be a total disaster for white in about a trillion ways. So, and if the king moves away, I think black is fast enough to just play rook a8, because of queen a5, bishop b5, white's in trouble. Although actually, even simpler, in this position, queen takes d4, because if bishop takes a5. The point, though, is after rook a8, white really has no way of creating a substantial attack. So I was getting really low on time, and I just panicked here. I just played king b2, which is a natural-looking move, trying to set up some attack, but I mean, trying to play rook b4, just like in the other variation, but up a tempo, so if black plays something like h6, maybe rook b4, and maybe now I can play queen a5 here because the knight's not hanging, and there's not going to be checks after bishop d4. There's reasons to play king b2, but it's just too slow, because black plays bishop b6 right away. And now, if rook b4, rook a8, it's just history. What's white going to be able to do? The queen's going to get trapped. The best move for white is rook to c1, but I think that the position is still going to be lost. I was in horrible time pressure, and I played queen to b4, which was obviously a very poor move. I'm trying to play knight a4 and look at some white dark squares, but black just plays c5 here, and I was kind of shocked that I hung a rook, which was always unfortunate, but I was lost anyway, so I of course immediately resigned in this position. But I think it was interesting how the game reached a very tense point after castle's queenside, and every move had to be very precise. And here I felt that I played well, but I didn't play perfectly, and that really cost me. The positions where I really messed up were mostly like bishop d2 was inaccurate for sure. Bishop b2 is a better move, but here there I think at this point I should have been happier to bail for the end game with bishop d4 here. That's really the only big mistake I made the entire game, and even still I ended up losing in a little over 20 moves with the white pieces, which really should never happen. So it's positions like these that often a stronger player will beat a weaker player, where it's very tense. It's not necessarily calculation as much as understanding, but one mistake will cost you the game. I think this is the kind of position that a strong player will definitely have an advantage in, and I'm hoping I can actually get better at those. So the next time I play a player as great as Onishuk, I give him a little more of a fight. So thanks. This is International Master Sam Shanklin signing off.